I'm Sarah Khalife. I am a solutions engineer at GitHub, and I've been there actually about 4 years now, which is kind of crazy to think about. Before this, I was a software engineer working on cloud platforms, working on a lot of microservices, Kubernetes, and everything in between. And then what we're both very excited about is coming up next week is GitHub Universe. So what you'll be hearing today will kind of give a nudge of what we'll be also talking about next week.
Hey everyone, my name is Kevin Alwell. It's great to be here. I've been with GitHub for about 5 years, and you were going to tell a story about your recent wedding, I think in Greece, and I was going to try to follow that up with another amazing image. That's what Sarah's image was. So instead, because I didn't have an amazing place to share with you, I have Rivendell here, so how many folks know where that is? And think about what that meant to Frodo when he saw that. So I'm grateful to have been invited here to share a few ideas. This is actually Sarah's opportunity to speak, and she was graciously included me, so grateful to be here.
We're excited for our conversations today. So what are we going to be talking about today? So we really talked about what is Copilot in the software development lifecycle. But what is the goal? What is the motivation? Why should you even be here listening to this talk? Well, the first thing we really want to talk about is Copilot for happiness, developer happiness. What does that mean? How can you be individually leveraging Copilot to make yourself more productive, to make yourself more comfortable and satisfied with what you're doing? The other aspect is talking about a little bit on a scenario perspective. From AI and AppSec, how can you take Copilot and take it up one level and talk about, in this scenario, how can I use something like Copilot? And then we really want to focus on Copilot for inner sourcing. This allows you to talk about Copilot at an enterprise level. What do we see now? What do we see in the future? And how do we kind of envision it, not only from our own GitHub side of things, but from our own experiences, from talking to our customers? How do we envision this to be a very exciting moment in software development? So I'm just going to stand here so it's easier for me. Go to the next slide. But today we're talking about GitHub Copilot. So who here has used GitHub Copilot?
Woo!
Woo! That's awesome. That's so exciting. So with GitHub Copilot today, what you see is code completions. You can start leveraging the GitHub, the Copilot chat within your IDE. We work with Copilot to really think through what does AI mean with GitHub. Copilot, what you're seeing today, is the first iteration, and there's more to come regarding that. How does it work? So Copilot today is a plugin that you run within your IDE. So we work with VS Code, Visual Studio, NeoVim, and IntelliJ, and other JetBrains IDEs. You can use that Copilot plugin and start using Copilot in your day-to-day work. So what does it do? It takes the context from your IDE and it pulls it in and says, okay, based on the context that you're providing me, I'm going to provide back a suggestion. So the more information you provide, the more context you provide, the better answers you might get back as suggestions. With Copilot today, what you're getting is the context that is being pulled in is only from the tabs that are open locally. So if you have an IDE and you have a couple of different tabs open, it's pulling from that context. You can initiate Copilot by writing a comment, or just starting to write code. It will help you autocomplete that. You can ask for alternative ways to write something. So you can pull up a different screen that gives you a couple more suggestions of ways to write one specific function or even the whole class. So with Copilot today, again, it's a code completion capability that really accelerates how you're doing your work. But also, if you think about it, it's on an individual user basis, it's making you a happier developer. It's making me a happier developer for sure. But also, when you take it to the next level, how can I incorporate that with more of a workflow in mind? How do I incorporate a specific workflow? And then you take that again to the next level up. Now let's talk about culture, inner source. How do you bring that inner source culture and help allow Copilot to accelerate that inner source culture? So with Copilot chat, so Copilot is one of the aspects is Copilot chat. So with Copilot, you can autocomplete code, but alongside with Copilot is Copilot chat. Today, you can start using Copilot. It's in public beta. You can start using Copilot to explain your code, to fix vulnerabilities, to fix any typos, to create tests, to generate a unit test, because who likes generating and writing their own unit tests? And many other things. So why don't we go into a live demo so you can see what that looks like?
Awesome.
So it's demo time. So what I'm going to do today, I might zoom in a little bit so you have a little more visibility. What I'm going to show today is you can do this in your Visual Studio Code locally, or you can do it with a code space. So I'm actually going to use a code space to spin up. I actually just spun one up right before the session just in case it took a little too much time. So what I'm going to do is go back to my code space that I have opened up. Oops. Go to my code space here that I have opened up.
This is all wrong already. This is not dark mode, Sarah.
Fair. I actually have it with my setting on time, so
Okay.
It's daytime right now. But in all fairness, Copilot today can be used within your IDE locally, or you can use it in code spaces. So if you want to hear more about code spaces, come talk to us after. That's not the talk today. But what I'm going to do first, actually, is to go through it and download Copilot so you can see what it looks like from the beginning. So I don't have Copilot enabled here. I'm going to actually go search for Copilot. And what I want to install is both Copilot and Copilot Chat. So I'm going to go through and install both. And now I have Copilot running. Usually when you do this locally, you'll be logging in with your GitHub Enterprise Cloud or GitHub Enterprise or GitHub Cloud environment, so you can log in with your username, password. But it's in my code space. Everything's local within the repository, so it actually has access to that already. You will see, actually, when I go back into my little IDE here, I'm going to go through and create a new file so you can see what it looks like when we're creating a new file. Oops. Let's go back into this section here. I'm going to go through and create a new file and call it maybe point.js. So in this case here, point.js, let me just make sure I installed Copilot. Cool. It's all installed. So with point.js, I want to start writing something from scratch. In this case here, there's many use cases with Copilot. You can start building an existing code. I just want you to see the basic use case so you can understand where it is today and what you can do with it in your specific scenarios.
Just a thought. I don't see Copilot popping up yet. I'm just looking
I'm
at.
going to start typing.
It said it was activating your extensions, so it may not have them installed yet on the code space.
Yeah,
Just a thought. Let's see.
That is also what I noticed. Let me just spin up a new code space. How about we do that?
Well, I think it was just load. Okay.
I didn't see it load, so that's why.
Okay.
So I'm going to spin up a new code space, and then we'll go from scratch so you can see what that would look like. Usually I have a pre-configured environment, but I really want to show you how you can start today and how you can start using it within a couple of minutes.
It may be, if I was just, as you're doing that, I was just going to offer, it may be TMI, but the way we're thinking about the IDE experience for an AI pair programmer, it's inclusive of both the completions extension and chat. So now what you'll notice is when you install GitHub Copilot, the completions extension there, the kind of the primary extension, if you will, that you've known historically if you've already used it, it actually also automatically installs Copilot Chat as a dependency, which I think for some was somewhat of a surprise, but it's a good surprise now.
All right. So how do I know Copilot is running? We can see this tiny little icon down here that it says Copilot is enabled. And you can see this within VS Code. So CodeSpaces has a baseline of VS Code, so it's basically, think of it as I'm using VS Code. Let's go back into our environment here, and I'm going to go open up a new file onto point.js. So with the new file, it doesn't really have any context, so I'm going to provide the context that I want Copilot to start helping me write with. So first thing I want to say is let's start building let's build a two-dimensional point class. So a class that represents a two-dimensional point. So as I click enter, it's activating Copilot. I'm giving it context. I'm giving it comment to tell me, hey, this is the next thing I want you to do. In this case, it's continuing to add more comments, which is a good practice, but I just want to start writing my code. So I'm going to go through and say class point and then click enter. So I'm writing code, I'm writing comments, and it's auto-completing. As you can see, this gray italicized code here, and I'm just going to zoom in one more time. This gray italicized code is suggestions from Copilot itself. So for me to accept those suggestions, I can click tab. You can see it's actually suggesting a lot more. It's like suggesting a full-blown class on how to build a point class that represents a two-dimensional point. So I can go through, actually, why not? Let's accept all of that. That looks pretty great to me. As a developer, I want to use my understanding and my knowledge to decide if I want to accept and edit, or do I want to accept and just move forward, or do I want to find an alternative way? So you can also look for alternatives. But I'm going to still keep writing and contribute a couple more lines of code here.
You're missing a closing bracket, I think.
Yes, there we go. So what I'm going to build now is a method to calculate the distance, because I don't think this provided. Oh, it did actually. Great. So let's find a method that calculates the closest point. Method calculating the closest.
And you can see that Copilot's working because you get these little round trips that it's making from your client out to the service and back. And so that should take about 200 to 400 milliseconds.
So as you're typing, Copilot is thinking, and yes, you can see it auto-completing a lot of the things. So it actually works pretty fast in my point of view, where it's fast enough where I'm accepting whatever it's suggesting next. So I'm looking for the closest point. Great, I'll take that method and continue on. This one, I can tell from just my own understanding, it's defining the closest point to be the first point in the array, and it's going through a for loop and detecting the rest. So what do I want to do next is maybe build out a farthest point, but I'll give it a little more information. So just a tap more information. I want to now build a static method, for instance. A static method. If I can spell it. Great. So now in a list of points, great. So as I'm going through, I give it a little more nudge, and it's building out a little more context of what I suggested. So now it's giving me back a static method. In the same scenario as above, it's going through a for loop and detecting the farthest point by assigning the first point and going through and measuring the distance there. If you notice, actually, it's using the distance method that we already created. So there's a distance method up here. So it's taking the context of the file to really provide a response back based on what it's understanding. So it's already learned from the open source world. It already knows how to write certain things. But the more context it has within those files that you have open, the better results you will get. So it knows you have a distance method. Why not use that distance method to calculate the closest points and farthest points?
People often come to us and they're like, "You're training Copilot on our code. How do you, and we ask them, like, why do you think so, right?" And it's because as they're writing code, as you're kind of buffering the context for your prompts, it starts to look so much like how your organization and how you write code, including obviously the services that are available in the context. So it appears that way, but that's not actually the case. It is all relying on a foundational model.
Yes. It's relying on the foundational model. And for those that are in very regulated businesses, so hello everybody, those foundational models are really great. The foundational model that we're using is really good. But to provide that more contextful, it allows Copilot to then take that context and erase it as soon as it's providing a suggestion. So for companies that are very regulated, it gets a little bit easier to get Copilot approved across your company. So if you want to use it, we have a lot of customers today that are all very heavy financial services that you can start using it today in their enterprise setting, as well as in very common use in open source. So the next point I want to build is a quick unit test for my closest point method and for my farthest point method. So let's say a method to unit test the closest point method. So I'll take that in and say, okay, I want a unit test. Let's see what it provides for us as it's calculating here. And you can see the little buffering that's happening at the bottom there. Actually, this is a really great unit test. Sometimes you get different results, and based on what you want to see, based on what context you're providing, what parameters you're stating, you'll get different type of answers. So in this case, it's actually going through, it's creating some random points, and it's going through a for loop and validating, okay, let's see what it actually, if the unit test responds with a correct point. So I'll take that. But if I wanted to look at alternative ways, what I can do is actually hit Control-Enter, and it will synthesize other solutions for our class. So if I want to build out a different way, and let's see if my internet works well here, it provides other solutions on how to calculate and unit test a lot of the methods that you're providing. So let's actually try that with the next one, just maybe that connection there did not work. So a method to calculate, to unit test, the farthest point method. So I'm going to hit Control-Enter here and see what it comes up with. And there we go. So it's providing a full-blown alternative suggestion for our class. So we can see here, as I'm going through this, you could see there are alternate ways to write this full class, and it understands that. So it's providing those suggestions back to me, and that includes both unit testing for the farthest point and closest point methods. This is a great place where a developer or even an expert developer that could do most of this really snappy to see, okay, this is a different way of writing it. Or maybe say I'm a fresh developer, I haven't really written unit tests or integration tests coming into my now industry job versus from college or boot camps. It allows you to see alternative ways to build out something, so then you don't have to go into Stack Overflow or Google search or somewhere like that to find other solutions. So I'm just going to actually accept what it previously suggested, because I actually really like the static method there. And then I want to go through and really talk about not only what is auto-completed, but also what Copilot Chat can do. So if I go through this here, there's now a little chat icon. I have my point class that I just created. I want to actually have it explain maybe a piece of code for me. So let's go back to this closest point method and ask it to explain. So I can do a slash command, so you can find all the slash commands, or you can write explain the code. I'm just going to click that. And as it's thinking and providing a response, you'll see that it's explaining to you exactly what's happening within that class. It knows it's a JavaScript language, so it knows how to explain what is happening within JavaScript specifically, but it also understands that it's calculating something. So if you go through here, it's actually, it gives you a step-by-step explanation. Every time I'm surprised, every time I do it, because it gives you more and more info. So it says, hey, it initializes the closest point, it's calculating the closest point, it's using if the distance is less, it's telling you how the for loop is working. And then it tells you, okay, the distance method used in this not shown, but it's presumably in the method in the same class. So it will tell you, hey, I noticed another method here, it's presumably in the same class. So it is in this case, and it's basically learning from the highlighted code that I just provided.
There's basically infinite use case. When we come into conferences or have conversations with customers or just developers generally, it's always like, oh, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I write these? Can I use this framework or implement my test for me? The answer is probably give it a try. There's just an infinite number of use cases, and this is just one of them, a good one.
We'll take questions towards the end, just so we have enough time. So we can talk and demo Copilot more. But we really want to get you some actionable items here and talk about what we've learned, what we've seen, what we're currently learning, because this is only step one. But developer happiness is one of the biggest things. People talk about developer productivity. That's from an enterprise focus. As an individual consumer, what do I get out of it? Hey, I can pair program with somebody that is not another human being, which can be good and bad, because having human interaction is great because you get to talk about a lot of different problems. But it's also great because there is no attitudes, there's no issues when you're talking about how you write this function. You can just write whatever you feel in Copilot and let it not know if you're mad or angry. It doesn't matter. There's no feelings there. So it's a happy pair programmer that is there to help you be more effective in whatever you're trying to do. It's an expert system. As it's learning, as it's taking that context from around you, you can start thinking of it as expert system. The more tabs you have open, the more context it has. If you're using specific logging system or error handling system and you have those tabs open, it's going to provide a suggestion back to you from that expert system in that mindset. It's a code translator. As you saw Copilot earlier in Copilot Chat, actually I did not show a code translation, but if you highlight one of those texts, you can say, hey, can we translate this from JavaScript to Python? And
COBOL to Java. Anybody have COBOL code? My lady back there, yes.
And in all fairness, that's a great point, but is that the right answer? As a developer, do you want to translate your COBOL code, or should you just be rewriting it in a better way today? Copilot just writes it faster alongside with you. I was at the TED AI conference a couple weeks ago, and somebody said, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but somebody said, AI in itself is never going to be better than a person. A person with AI is going to be better than the person that hasn't touched AI at all. So we want to really get ahead of that. And at the end of the day, it's a faster keyboard. I just wrote a JavaScript class in a couple of minutes while I was explaining and showing things. So imagine how fast you can operate when you're leveraging Copilot. We run a study, and you can learn about this more on our GitHub blog as well, but we run a study against 95 developers. We did kind of A/B testing in a sense, and we had a group that didn't have Copilot and a group that did have Copilot. They had the same task, they had to operate, they were, as much as we could, keep them in the same types of groups of like education, background, expertise, and so forth, so then it can have a similar output. And we found that with Copilot, the developers worked 50% faster than developers without Copilot. So even at the end of the day, even if you are considering using Copilot, this is just a great proof point of why you should be using it, even as an individual user, not only as an enterprise. As an enterprise, we can talk about this 10,000-fold, because this will multiply across all of your enterprise teams. Developer happiness has been one of the biggest things that we're looking into as GitHub. When we think of developers today, when you talk about it from an enterprise perspective, they talk about developer productivity, developer efficiency. But as GitHub, we really want to take that and take it to developer happiness. How can a developer be happier today? Less mental effort. Like if you're building something that is kind of boring, you don't need to put all the effort that you have to build that out. You can literally just ask Copilot to help you write that, obviously review it because you are the expert nonetheless, and you need to go through your own processes and standards, but it helps you get rid of those mundane tasks, the repetitive tasks. Now you can focus on what's differentiating. It's a lot more satisfying when you are using Copilot because you can finish things a little bit faster that otherwise might have taken you a little bit longer, because it requires you to maybe go searching your internal docs or Stack Overflow, or maybe you're learning a new language that you haven't used before. This really just helps you accelerate to get at least a minimum viable product of what you want to achieve. And it keeps you in the flow. You don't have to go into a different tool to find the answers. You can look at alternatives. You can find answers through that. So previously, if you came to my talk last year, I talked about security and shifting left with Advanced Security, with GitHub Advanced Security. So I really want to take that and build on it. So today, you're doing, your existing workflow might exist of developing code, hitting some deadlines, getting QA telling you, hey, you need to fix this before it goes to production, and then you kind of have to go back to the beginning, and everything's fine, right? And not on fire. I didn't miss my deadline. But what we really want to talk about is shifting left. The idea of shifting left is a great idea, and being able to incorporate security earlier on. But think about that with Copilot or with generative AI overall. The ability for a developer to go back and contribute code alongside with Copilot is the first iteration. But then you can think about incorporating Copilot when you want to fix a vulnerability. Ask Copilot Chat to help you fix that SQL injection. See if it's right, run your unit test, run your integration test, and go through that process. So now you can at least accelerate the in-between processes that you had to follow before, but alongside with a pair programmer, expert service member, whatever you want to consider Copilot to be. So I just gave a few scenarios, individually, developer happiness, but also from an enterprise perspective. How do you incorporate Copilot in your day-to-day work today with shifting left? But I want to take this back to a different level, and let's talk about from an enterprise level perspective. How do you talk about Copilot with inner sourcing? And this can tie to many scenarios with open sourcing. And I'll pass that over to Kevin.
Thank you. How are we doing on time back there, approximately?
We have, I think, about 10 minutes.
Oh, we have 10 minutes?
A little over 10 minutes, yeah.
Okay, great. Good.
Right? I think so.
Okay, we'll take that for what it is. Awesome, great, thank you, Sarah. Copilot for InnerSource. Two of the first questions that customers ask us is, does Copilot train on our code when we're using it? And it's usually the InfoSec person asking the question. We're like, no, it doesn't. And then the business stakeholders like, can it please? Like how do we leverage the insight from across our organization to further enhance the Copilot experience that we have? And within the context of this audience here, we're calling that Copilot for InnerSource, right? It's actually unlocking the idea that InnerSource had all along, which is to leverage the collective understanding within your organization to make you more effective at writing code according to the standards from within, right? Whereas Copilot today is really based on this foundational model, which has the collective understanding of how to build software, from the internet, from the interwebs. So this is a classic definition using InnerSource is taking open source practices, applying them within your organization. Next slide, please. I'm just going to run through these a little faster, only because I'm conscious of the time. And so we're going to focus on this specific workflow here, although to Sarah's point, I think generative AI has a place to play in both code discovery or solution discovery rather, and contribution. And when we're thinking about InnerSource, we're thinking about it from these two lenses, right? So finding a solution to a problem within the organization, and then providing solutions to problems within the organization. Next slide, please. The problem is, I've been here for 5 years now, and I've been a part of a lot of like backroom conversations and conversations around a beer, and it's like, it's really hard to do this thing at scale. And I've seen it successful only like a small handful of times. And why is that? Right? Well, I think it's for a lot of reasons, and we're going to explore why that is in just a minute here. Common developer challenges. Next slide, please. For discovery, you're writing some code. You need a solution. Are you going to go parse, next slide, please. Are you going to go parse 100,000 repositories across your organization, or look through your inventory, your inner source catalog for a repo that looks like it might be relevant to the solution that you're implementing, go through the code, the README, et cetera, right? In order to actually find a solution that's relevant within your org. You're going to go to Google, you're going to go to Stack Overflow, and it's going to have the answer, it's going to have sufficient upvotes, so you're like, this must be true, probably no vulnerabilities in there, throw it in my code and push it to production. So the barriers to discovery are very high, and that's why one of the reasons why inner source doesn't work, right? Because we're like water as developers. We're looking for the path of least resistance to solve our problem in most cases. And doing it the inner source way, the discovery is often fruitless. If you were to go and look through the inventory of repositories, 100,000, it's going to take you forever, and you're never actually going to find the thing you want, 9 times out of 10, 9.9 out of 10. Yes, please. Okay, let's talk about how Copilot changes the equation. Next slide, please. Okay. Back? Yep, thank you. Yeah, I removed a bunch of stuff. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about really a few things. I think where we are today and where we're going with Copilot. And so the idea is basically what you have now is, again, a foundational model. So there's services around that to make it more effective. I'm happy to say that, and the engineers that actually built Copilot are like, you're vastly oversimplifying it. But for our context, Copilot today is the internet's understanding of how to build software. Now what we're talking about is supplementing that understanding with your organization's understanding, right, in order to kind of tweak the outputs. And if I may, this is something I always like to kind of call out. The foundational model today, I don't know the exact number, suggestion acceptance rate per language, which is a core measure of efficacy of Copilot, goes something like 37% to 60%, depending on the language. And for some companies, we saw implementing at scale, we've seen like 70%. What language was that? That
was in JavaScript and Python.
And Python. So it's there's incredible value for you today. But by leveraging your paradigms, I think you get improvement in quality, and you see that show up in PRs. And I think you also get and a double-digit improvement in the suggestion acceptance rate, that core measure of efficacy. So I'm actually, don't go to the next slide if you don't mind. We're just going to stay here for another moment. How much time do we have left?
I believe like 5 more minutes.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up real quick and talk about how we're doing this incrementally, and then we'll take questions. I want to leave time for questions. So how are we doing this incrementally? Well, today, what Sarah has already mentioned is that we do have some level of RAG, right, which is like the least friendly acronym ever. It's like, what is it, retrieval augmented? I'm on stage, so I can't remember. But anyway, that's the problem, right? So the way that we're leveraging RAG today is getting the best bang for our buck, which is the open files that you're operating in within your IDE. If you have a certain token volume that you can send to the model, you want to find the most relevant context for your prompts, right? And so that's what we're doing today by leveraging the context within of the open tabs of your IDE. Every time we send a prompt, kind of package it up in there with the code and the comment, and then you get back your suggestion. So let's talk about incrementally. What are we doing next? Well, beyond that, what we're going to be doing is looking in, for example, your terminal to see whether or not you have any error logs within your IDE. Whatever your debug console looks like. We're going to look at the other files within your IDE and pack that in for additional context. Beyond that, we're going to look at your full dependency tree to see if you're actually invoking services that aren't explicitly stated or that aren't available currently within your IDE. We're going to look at this is kind of the holy grail of inner source, right? We're actually going to look at all the repositories across your organization, if you opt in the future, all the repositories in your organization, understand which of them are the gold standard, if you will, because you'll apply attributes to them to tell us what your gold standards are. And this way, all your suggestions will be tweaked with the knowledge from across your organization, and that knowledge being the best practices. People always push back, like, I don't know if I want my source code influencing Copilot suggestions because the quality is low on the mean. But if you have just the gold standard, then you do get those double-digit improvements in the suggestion acceptance rate beyond 50%. We're talking about AI writing greater than 50% of the code that you're writing on a weekly basis. It's pretty extraordinary. Beyond that, if I may, just one last thing. How are we going to improve the context of Copilot suggestions? After we have your organization's code, we're also going to allow you to do things like reach out to any third-party service, to grab some contextual information and bring it in. Maybe that for you is like a Confluence site or some documentation and Jira about a feature that you're working on. And that will further pack into the Copilot experience. So just forward 3 slides. Actually, 2 slides. One more, please. One more. Yep, thank you. OK. Fine-tuning. A really interesting, and next slide, actually, if you don't mind. Awesome. OK. So just really quickly, fine-tuning. So we talked about RAG. One of the other ways that we're further kind of packing in understanding and use case specific, we talked about COBOL. Well, the reality is there's not a lot of COBOL on GitHub or Stack Overflow or what the foundational model's trained on. And so a great use case might be to tune a custom model with COBOL, right? COBOL code, and that'll allow it to kind of be more effective for that specific use case. Or if you're in an organization, not pointing to anyone specifically, that has its own custom programming language, that might be an interesting use case for you. Sarah, please.
Yeah, so what Kevin is wonderfully explaining is like the inner sourcing capability will grow immensely with Copilots. Alongside the idea of leveraging something like generative AI across your code bases and across your environment to make it more productive for you as an enterprise, but also individually from a developer perspective. So action items that you could take away. So what is the first thing that you need to do? In many cases, Copilot has been introduced to a lot of our developers, but it's not all the developers yet. So I think the first thing is introduce Copilot to your community. Introduce Copilot to your open source community. Introduce it to the developers that you're working with alongside at your companies, or have maybe your company go through a Copilot POC, and really just get in front of it. Find a workflow that makes generative AI a lot more viable for your use cases. So in the use case I gave is incorporating that with fixing your vulnerabilities. How can you take that to the next level? Think of a scenario that would be better accelerated at your company. I'll pass it back to you.
Sure. So something else to consider as you're looking at, like, well, how can we leverage the knowledge of our organization? Understand where your gold standards are. So make sure you at least have an inventory of your repositories. Lay that groundwork, that foundation, so you're ready when Copilot's enabled. All of a sudden, it's just going to get smarter and smarter for the end developer. But you, the team that understands where that information's coming from, will have been prepared. There is a white paper that we shipped, AI-inner source, tiny URL. Tried to make that small for you. Feel free to read that. It encapsulates a lot of the ideas that we talked about today.
Kevin definitely graciously shipped that white
paper.
So
I wrote this, so I'm like trying to plug it.
Yeah.
Right? I get paid a penny every click. So.
We can take some questions. We're here all day, but yeah, let's take some questions if we have time.
So, what evidence do you have or have gathered that Copilot actually improves the developer's understanding of the code? Because obviously,
that's a great question.
For making code, no one understands the code. That would not be good. So, is it comprehension of the code, the understanding of the code? How are you measuring that?
That's a great question. So to the room, if they didn't hear a question, what data do we have that Copilot helps the developer understand the code better? I can take that. For today, I would say Copilot Chat is that next iteration. Copilot Chat being in public beta is the first places that we've helped developers understand code better because it helps you explain what's going on. It helps you treat the functions or the methods or even the class as a learning tool to ask Copilot what's going on in this method. So I would say that's going to be alongside with Copilot Chat, and that's something that we are currently actively researching. It's not a way. Sorry?
Is it commenting the code?
It can comment the code. It does comment the code. Actually, it's one of the best practices. It always does add more comments, but it is adding more comments. But it's up to the developer to have that initiative to understand what's going on and help developers kind of explain what that code is in the first place to add the right comments.
And one other thing, if I may just kind of add to that, I think the best place for the team to get an understanding of the impact of a piece of code is probably the pull request workflow, right? That's where you're having a conversation about what that code's impact is going to be on the overarching application. You'll have the insight from your CI tools that'll say whether or not there's a vulnerability, whether or not it passed all your acceptance tests, et cetera. And so, is there specific research that suggests whether or not a developer understands the impact of code? I think it's whether or not that code is making its way to production. Yeah. So is that code getting through pull requests and making its way to production? And the answer is absolutely yes, that we're seeing that happen at scale.
All right. I think we might be at time, but we're here all day. Let us know if you have more questions. We can answer them offline. I know you had a question back there, so happy to answer them as we continue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Try Copilot.
That was